I would argue that financial services have been around since day dot. The Greeks, the Romans, Persians, they were borrowing, lending, exchanging different currencies. These are not new concepts, it's just how they've evolved and changed.
What skills do you think that you ported over when you moved into education?
The one thing, as I said, I was trying to understand how the financial system worked. If anything, I just think we're only going to accelerate.
100%.
And even in terms of education, if you can make a difference in a person's life, it's a very powerful thing. But as there's more data out there, guess what? You can use it. I build my own GPT these days. It's not that hard to do. But I can only do it because of the amazing accessibility to the data. Clearly, everyone's going on about artificial intelligence. That's just an end product, I think, of more data analytics, more machine learning, leads to more AI.
It's all about the data, right? Machine learning, AI, they all have to be fed with data.
To embrace the challenge. One of the hardest things to change is culture and people. People are hard to change, actually. You know, the technology is kind of easy in a way, but I think you also look at other trends. So does anyone seriously think that we're not going to be generating more data of better quality over the next few years? You know, I think with more digitisation, I think we just see more access, more value creation to be something of a standard setter. Web3 is part of the maturity of where I think we're going. In education, it offers lots of interesting challenges and opportunities.
What advice would you give to entrepreneurs or future learners?
For me,
Welcome, Andrew. Welcome to the pod. Right? Happy to have you here, Andrew.
Oh, no, thank you for asking, Jesus. It's really nice to be here.
And, I have some Pat FinTech swag.
Some of the swag, as we call it.
The swag is important, right, Andrew? I guess we can start with Pat FinTech. At some stage, Andrew, just tell you that journey around Pat FinTech. But first, can you tell the audience a bit about yourself? Your background, I think, is very interesting, Andrew, from financial services, how you ended up in education, right? So if you give us a bit of flavor of that journey, and then we can jump into Pat FinTech.
Sure. So first of all, for the audience, I am Irish, despite the accent. There's a long accent. That's another day's work. But no, I basically worked in financial services. I worked for a couple of banks, worked primarily, probably most of my career for a hedge fund for about 12, 13 years. Mm-hmm. Everything from sort of like trade settlement, repo desk, and then on the trading desk. So I had a really big, sort of broad experience. Left the hedge fund, classic cliche, just don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I've had enough, Mm-hmm. Whether that was a good or bad decision, I don't know. Sort of did a bit of consultancy, knew a lot of people in the industry, and then very accidentally started lecturing with Dublin Business School only about 11 years ago. It feels like a lot longer than that. And that kind of just led me into a journey where I call myself like a very lucky but very accidental educationalist, because I always like to say that I found a vocation late in life, and I mean that very seriously, because it's a big word. And I think, if you find a vocation in your life, you're really, really privileged and lucky. And I suppose you want to make the most of it. That's the other thing I'd say. You want to make the most of it if you get that opportunity.
Andrew, tell me a bit about, before we move into the edtech and the fintech, because there's a lot of, we're going to have to unpack in a short period of time in that particular space. But the hedge fund, what did you like? What didn't you like?
For me, I was fortunate growing up that I was always very kind of curious about the world. And I always liked history. And that kind of led you into trying to be, you're interested in politics, economies, which lead you into like markets and, finance. So I was always very interested in that. So the hedge fund I worked for was what they'd still probably call a macro kind of strategy hedge fund. Mm-hmm. So it kind of caught all of those things up. So I really enjoyed, I suppose, the daily news flow, knowing what's going on in the world, how it wasn't impacting, asset prices, interest rates, understanding the economy. I really liked all of that stuff. The pressure which comes with performance, though, and especially if you're on a trading desk, it was fun. I'm not saying I didn't enjoy it for a period of time, but it's intense. And, I think at a certain point, I just thought, I don't want to be doing this for the rest of my life. I want to try and find if I can take whatever skills I have and find something else to do with them. So no, it was a really fun part of my life. But ultimately, that performance element, whether it be daily, weekly, quarterly, to deliver, returns in a risk adjusted way, is intense. It's intense. It's a very intense, environment to be part of. Let's just say that. And you meet some very intense people, if I can say that as
Oh,
well.
that's for sure, right? And other than that, what skills do you think that you ported over when you moved into education, right? Is that
Yeah,
performance that laser focus?
that's a really good question. I think, I mean, it's a bit of a journey, but I think the one thing, as I said, I was relatively lucky to have was a high degree of curiosity about
Mm,
how the world worked. And I suppose I developed a particular interest in trying to understand how the financial system worked. And that obviously leads you into how the financial services
mm,
do or don't deliver. And I am a great believer that financial services are really important to society because there's a
yes.
really important societal element, whether it's to do with access or the availability. And I think financial services, they are fundamental to, if you like, the modern economic human experience. But
Mm,
I would argue that financial services have been around since day dot. Like the Greeks, the Romans, Persians, they were borrowing, lending, they were exchanging different currencies, or they were bartering for things.
mm,
Even concepts like insurance were not
yes.
unknown. These are not new
Yes.
concepts. It's just how they've evolved and changed. And I suppose that segues into when I first sort of really became aware of what's still a bit of a nebulous expression, FinTech. What does it mean?
Yes.
And I just saw it very simply, and I got more and more interested in, I suppose, technology as well. And I suppose it was an era where, Web 2 or 2.0,
Mm,
really evolved in the early 2000s. And that led to obviously a real change in the way we thought about how financial services were being delivered. And that was probably, if you like, the embryo that FinTech, whatever it is or isn't to people, emerged from. And that definitely became a big centre of interest for me. Definitely.
it's interesting. You're right, Andrew. You're still trying to define this word fintech up to now, right? Yeah. And
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I was lucky. I mean, for example, I can vividly remember when I first met you, and there's many other people when I first met them, and you go back 5, 6, 7 years, even. People were still, I think, trying to figure out how this was going to evolve, and
mm,
it's been an absolute, fascinating period to live through. And I think, if anything, I just think we're only going to accelerate even further into how
100%.
we think about how technology can change for the better. And I would always emphasize this,
Mm,
for the better for society, for individuals. So the original concepts about reducing the rents and taking the rent seekers out of, the financial system. So the original concepts around disintermediation, I think, are still very powerful concepts that underpin a lot of what so-called fintech, however you want to frame that, has evolved and needs to evolve. And it's interesting, I suppose, going into your world a little bit, Jesus, that to some degree, all things crypto or digital assets, to some degree, I think that was built off the disintermediation
mm.
concept. That why have we got all these intermediaries basically just rent seeking, to use that economic term, in the system? Are there ways that we can deliver more efficiently, with more access, at a better price, a better service for individuals?
Yeah, that's what actually got me into using our jargon, right, to the Web 3.0, right? Because we were talking about Web 2.0 with fintech, and then
Yeah,
Web 3.0 was exactly that. Andrew, because I believe, as you mentioned there, I'm a fundamental believer the financial service that is a great platform for social, personal, and business empowerment, right?
absolutely.
So how can we get that access to more people, right?
Yeah,
Then of course there's like any value chain, there's intermediation, and intermediation has to take some fees as well, right, for their service. Web 3.0 is potentially can give more access to people,
yeah,
this platform, but also make it more efficient, right? I'll segue into that now, Andrew, because when we start talking about Web 3.0, it was a roller coaster. Everything
oh
was
yeah,
happening, right?
absolutely.
With Bitcoin, and
I
now
mean,
people are understanding the
you know,
Ethereum is a platform, and the DLT. Yeah, you actually lecture on that particular space, Andrew, around
yeah.
the technologies, right? So, what are your views now around the
No,
space? It has matured quite enough lot.
Yeah, look, to go back to what you said though. Another, I think, part of my journey, Jesus, and I think you're a similar mindset. I also like to feel that, and maybe this goes back to the hedge fund a little bit. I want to feel that whatever I'm doing or not doing, I'm trying to make a difference. I'm actually trying to do something that's positive for society. And even in terms of education, if you can make a difference in a person's life, it's a
Huge, huge.
very powerful thing. So that's where the vocational element comes. Where are we now? Look, I sort of, I'm relatively careful what I'd say in public a lot. But no, but
It's fine. Share your thoughts.
no, I think we clearly went through a period of, a very speculative period. Let's just say, there was a lot of speculation. The classic price number goes up type scenario. I think
Yes.
I think we've matured out of that. I think we're in a much better place. Like for example, 6, 7 years ago, when I was first writing FinTech courses, blockchain DLT was very fundamental to what I thought needed to be in the courses, and I think to some degree, the speculation kind of blurred the real
Yes.
utility of the technology, if I can put it like that. I think
100%.
we've matured out of that. I think a really good example, and it's a focus for me at the moment, is I like to say all things digital assets because I think still a lot of conflation with language. I think, when you say crypto or Web.3 or metaverse or even blockchain, I still think there's, smart contracts, whatever it happens to be. There's a lot of conflation of language. So I think we're in a much more mature place. I think that Web3 is part of the maturity of where I think we're going. For me, I think tokenization it has been
Yes.
for a long time, very interested because, I often call myself, and you might find this amusing, and your listeners might. Um, I'm a TradFi guy. So all this talk that we had about are you CFI or DeFi or TradFi, I'm a TradFi guy, but I embrace technology and I embrace change. So when I say I'm a TradFi guy, I can absolutely see the benefits of tokenizing a financial or real asset on a blockchain and creating more access to investing, creating therefore more capital in the system, and creating greater liquidity in a very seamless 24/7 type of way.
Yep.
That's very compelling. Now, there's lots of challenges around that. But to me, just from a traditional finance perspective, which hopefully I outlined, you can see how the technology empowers that. So when people make use cases around Web3, I can also see the very traditional, if you like, financial benefits that can be created. But obviously, they can be distributed in a different way, and the technology enhances that. And then, look, we're always going to have debates about how much regulation and anonymity is a big thing, like people's privacy of their data and how it's shared, and not that's I think a bit of a challenge in a lot of ways because I think where you have regulation, it's very difficult to have absolute privacy over data. So in my world, financial crime prevention would be a good example of that. We need, if you're going to prevent it, obviously you need to know
Yeah.
who
Yep.
the users are or the bad actors are. So no, I think we've matured a lot even in the last year, and I think it's going to be a really interesting few years ahead to see where we go with this. But for me, I suppose it's utility, Jesus, where you can demonstrate you're creating real financial value for individuals and society. And I don't just mean speculation about the value of something. I mean real utility. That's where I get really interested.
I think you bang on the money there, Andrew. At the end of the day, it's about problems, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
problems still to be solved in TradFi, right? A lot of opportunities there. Technology is a great enabler in that particular space. Trying to reinvent the whole ecosystem of financial services from the first design principles. I think that we're far from that, right?
Absolutely.
Using DLT, but starting to use the technology, in particular sections of the value chain, to create more transparency, potentially some ownership. You mentioned utility when we're talking about
Yeah.
transparency and ownership is absolutely vital in this. But with that said, I probably know I was bullish, and I'm very happy now that Bitcoin and potentially, let's say, Ethereum is making it to ETFs, right?
I might say that. I've had this conversation with a number of people that obviously, and look, I vividly remember sitting down talking about Bitcoin in 2010. You know, I knew a couple of guys. Now, I wish I maybe
You buy
listened.
some. That's the question that the audience. Does Andrew have some stashed Bitcoin somewhere?
But what I would also say, and I think it's a really good example, if you see obviously, the recent, if you like, price movement in Bitcoin, to some degree is correlated with the adoption of ETFs and spot ETFs and so on and so forth. But here's the thing I smile about is they are almost the most traditional type of
Yes.
structured product for assets. So it's this meeting the worlds again. Bitcoin has, to a great degree now, clearly been adopted into the traditional finance world. I mean, again, another simple example for Hesus, which is true, and I could prove this to anyone if they want to ask me. I remember 6 years ago, a dissertation student, their dissertation was basically trying to optimize portfolios, the returns and risks. And I said, why don't you try and do something different and put Bitcoin as the portfolio and see what improves the overall performance? So that's not a new concept to me. It's just
No,
a
it's not enough. Not at all. Not at
recognition
all.
of an asset class. That's all it is.
Not at all. Because I've talked about this as well for a while, and you probably to our mini chats about Bitcoin going into the pension particular space as an asset class. Of course, a risky asset class, right?
If
But
you
some people might want some exposure to it. Why don't we give some
if
customers
if
exposure
you're
to
a
it?
fund manager, and again going back to the example I just gave, whether you look, it's like saying to somebody, what's the value? What's the valuation of Apple? I don't know. Apple's got a value, but if I knew what the exact valuation was, I wouldn't probably be sitting here. More interesting. So, if you're an asset manager and you're convinced that Bitcoin has a value, and you can quantify whether Bitcoin can improve the diversified returns of your portfolio for whoever the end user is, Bitcoin's going to go into the portfolio. It could be
Yes.
1%, it could be whatever. That's all they're looking for, is to improve the risk reward returns for end users who could be, fund managers, insurance companies, whoever they are, hedge funds, whatever.
And do it in a safe way, right?
Yeah,
In this way, and then even we'll segue into the safe way because that's the debate now within the industry, right? Bitcoin meant to be decentralized with custodians coming in and institutional investors coming in, potentially decentralization. I said dilemma increases, right?
but I think, as I said, to go back, I mean, you've almost though the adoption of ETFs. You've almost now gone to the most traditional centralized type of financial product. But to me, that's not the point. The point is Bitcoin is obviously considered to be an asset class, and that's really the only point. What you believe Bitcoin is or isn't, to me, it's akin to saying whether you believe Amazon is a force for good or evil in the world, or whether you believe Amazon is going to change economic structure of whatever. I don't know. But Amazon obviously is a company that's very highly valued, and Amazon is valued on a more traditional type, probably way, on cash flows and whatever. But people clearly put a value on a Bitcoin or whatever it is, and therefore it's an asset class. It's a
No,
bit like
I agree.
it's like NFTs. I personally, I'm agnostic, but if somebody thinks an NFT is worth this, then it's worth this, and if someone else thinks it's worth more, it's worth more. It's just something that obviously gets traded. Whatever the utility value is, again, I'll leave that to the end user.
Switching gears, Andrew, because we talked about fintech, right? I want us to bring us a bit back to
Yeah,
edtech,
yeah,
and I love the fact that you mentioned that for you, the vocation you found a vocation that you love. Is going to be your life's destiny now to empower others through your knowledge and platform that you worked in previously was DBS, right? That would be school, and now you moved to Path
yeah,
FinTech to start educating the next generation of compliance officers and FinTech
yeah.
enthusiasts, let's say, with it in a different platform. And you can correct me on that, but I would like to for you to Andrew tell us about that journey, right? About from DBS to Path
Yeah,
FinTech, but fundamentally the gap that you and Jerry saw in the market of how to
yeah.
educate the next
So
generation of.
I as I said, I started lecturing about 11 years ago, a bit more. And it was a bit of a journey. I ended up running the accounting and finance programs at Dublin Business School, and I ended up writing a lot of new programs. A lot of them were sort of FinTech related. So an MSc in FinTech, I think we were the second in the country, so on and so forth. But the journey for me really was, Jesus, and it goes back to my background and this is, by the way, I have to say, not a criticism of DBS, or it's just an observation of the whole sector. So I'm talking about the whole of what I would see as third level
Education.
providers, universities and private providers. I just honestly came to the mind that a lot of what was being delivered in the classroom, particularly to part-time learners, and again, I'd like to emphasise that, because I think undergrads are undergrads, and you can talk about the undergrad experience in different ways. DBS and a lot of colleges has a lot of full-time MSc, MBA students who are normally foreign, coming into Ireland. They do their MSc for a year, and they then hope to obviously pursue careers in Ireland. And that's also a different market. But generally speaking, what I saw was a lot of what was being taught in the classroom. It wasn't related to the real world. It wasn't related to industry, or it wasn't related enough. There were gaps where, and again, I'm not personalising this in any way. You had lecturers in classrooms talking about things which they didn't really have any practical experience of. And a lot of courses were, let's say, designed by people who weren't really industry practitioners and didn't really understand. I mean, for me, an early example was I started lecturing and I got my old textbooks out and I was swatting up on whatever it was. And then I'd go into the classroom and I'd be like, but that's not actually how we really do it, like in industry. So I honestly felt there was a gap, particularly for part-time learners, that you needed to get industry people in the room. The programs needed to be written with real industry input. And then more importantly, because I always say this, Suze, I don't know if I've ever said it to you, I can spend months designing a new program and I can consult with people like you and I can feel like the program is really robust and it's really what industry are looking for in terms of the skills that they're trying to look for in terms of where the demand is, where the shortages are. But it really only comes alive in the classroom. When you put somebody in there. And I at PAT Business School, so moving on to Jerry Fahey's the MD. I knew Jerry a little bit from DBS days. Jerry founded PAT in 2017. It was very much an ACCA college and still is. But 3.5 years ago, Jerry approached me and he'd heard of FinTech, if I can slightly, and he'd heard that there was a lot of interest in FinTech and FinTech courses. And I then sort of fell into a bit of rabbit hole of risk and compliance because, and this maybe relates to something else you and I talked about previously. I had to make sure that what I was going to try and develop, that I felt there was real demand for it. And one of my conversations, which was a bit of a aha moment, as we might say, it was
nice.
I won't mention names, but it was somebody I spoke to who was a very experienced compliance professional, and they basically said to me, "I've just started working for a so-called FinTech. It was an e-payments institution, and I haven't got a clue what's going on, Andrew. I haven't got a clue. It's a completely different operating environment, different business model." The technology, the digitization, the cloud-based nature of it, I'm just lost. So I came to a realization that the compliance professional was kind of stuck in a moment and they needed to move into a more contemporary mindset and they needed to understand, things like cybersecurity and data protection and how everything was being digitized and moved to the cloud and how that was going to change business models and operating models, consumer protection, all of that stuff. They needed something to help them move into the more contemporary FinTech type financial services industry. And that was my aha moment. And I suppose since then I've tried to stay in my lane a bit because I think I personally believe another mistake that a lot of third level providers make is they try to be too much to too many things. I think you need to be good at what you do. And I think that you need to prove that you're good at what you do. And once you've done that, you can sort of move into sort of what they might call more adjacent problems.
Yes.
But I don't think you can sort of be everything to everyone. I think you need to build a brand that's based on quality. And the quality is what you achieve in terms of your learners. And for me, again, Jesus, a really defining moment was I focused on part-time learners, so they're mainly working professionals. So they're mainly people working in the industry who are looking to so-called upskill, reskill. But it's actually even simpler than that. People who come to do courses with us, they come to do courses with us because I think it's going to help their career. So it's actually very straightforward. And if I can help somebody's career, I feel that that correlates to improving standards for industry, and it correlates to providing the financial service providers with the talent they need for the industry to evolve and grow. And I then would say that helps society because it helps the economy, creates jobs. So again, I try to close the loop on all of it, Jesus, that, we're trying to create value right across the chain.
It's very interesting, Andrew, when I hear you talk, because I think you nearly approached it as if it was a product, right? So you
Yeah,
found your persona, part-time person looking to prove the career value proposition in the area of compliance, right? And then you went on to say, actually, I'll design the course initially, but I need to put the actual product in the hands of the users, the
yeah,
consumers, right? Which
yeah,
were the actual learners. And
yeah,
then you iterated year on year, right?
absolutely. No, and I think that was one of the things probably I've learned along the way is you need to. I spend a lot of time. So this morning, even I was talking to somebody about a new course that I want to build. It's probably taken me 6, 12 months to decide this is actually the right thing to do, because what you need to do, I think, is you need to establish where the demand is and where the real potential to create value is, because otherwise it's just a vanity project and you're wasting
Yeah.
time and you're wasting resources. So I've become, I think, quite good at identifying, and this is another thing you might find interesting because it does, I think, cross over into your world a little bit. I'm always trying to see what's coming next. So I'm always trying to see where is the demand coming from. Not all, So for example, in my world, new regulation is a classic
Yes.
example. So at the moment, a big focal point for us is all things related to the Digital Operation Resilience Act, because operational resilience has become a key theme now for regulators, and in Europe particularly so with this new DORA, as in the Explorer, that comes into effect in 2025. I'm sure you'll probably be spending some time with DORA in the next year or two,
Oh, big time, everyone.
and others. But the point is that this is new regulation. It's mandatory. It's something that financial providers, and not just financial service providers, it's very broad. They are going to have to look at this, figure out how they're going to implement it, and then build teams to make sure that they remain compliant. And it's not just about being compliant, it's managing risk. So there is going to be a demand for people who have those sort of skill sets over I think, the next several years. So I look at that and I think, can we create that talent that industry is going to be looking for?
I know, Andrew, we cannot package everything into RegTech, but you mentioned even like look at the regulation as a path to look at as an opportunity path, right? A lot of people don't have that mindset, right? They see regulation and compliance the cost center, right?
Yeah.
But what I love what's happening now through PAT is that they're looking at it as a strategic opportunity. You're educating the next generation of compliance officers to look at it as a strategic opportunity
Yeah.
and how to leverage that even for transformation projects, right? So can you unpack a bit that thought
Yeah, no,
process?
I again, I'm not a compliance professional by background, as I've already outlined, but I identified, I think, what I thought was demand and a need in the market. And going back to the value piece and what you just asked me, Jesus, I absolutely feel there's been, even in the last couple of years, a real evolution in the way we think about compliance. And I would also say this, Jesus. I started off saying risk compliance, and people used to say to me, why do you always say risk and compliance? It's compliance. I'm saying, no, it's not.
No,
It's management.
brother.
So And an example of that is the movement away, and it's still a transition from a more tick box nature of compliance. So the regulator says you have to do this, tick the box, to a more what we call risk based approach. And that's a much broader and deeper way to think about the compliance function, because the
Exactly.
way I position it now is if you have really good, robust regulatory compliance that is helping you manage the risks in your business, and that's where I'd now position the compliance role. It's helping the business manage its risks, understand its risk tolerance, how it manages those risks. That creates value for the business. So I think that a strong compliance culture is something that literally increases the valuation of a company, because it makes the company, for an investor, you have more confidence, in a company that has got really robust, not just compliance, but risk management. And from a regulatory perspective, that's probably more important than ever. So I think that the chief compliance officer is sitting at the board level. I think the chief compliance officer is almost akin to the role of the chief risk officer in terms of managing how the business operates, in my opinion. And that's been an interesting journey for me as well, Jesus, seeing that evolution, if you like.
And I think you bang on the money there, Andrew, because the compliance officer, that's the biggest challenge, right? At board level, showcasing the value of the compliance function, right?
Absolutely.
And now, how it actually impacts the balance sheet, right? And being able to be equipped with the
Because again,
tools, tell that story.
I would have always argued this, even going back, say, 10 years ago, Jesus, that one of the challenges, and again, in your world, one of the challenges a lot of fintechs always faced for me was financial services, particularly people of a certain generation, people tend to be a bit conservative. And when it comes to financial services, trust is a massive word. It's a massive word. You need to trust your provider. And that's normally you trust them with your money, your data, your security, whatever it is. And I think that, having that robust compliance and risk function, that only increases your trust and your reputation, and I think your value as a provider. So I would personally be a big proponent that, especially newer fintechs, concept that we've developed internally that we really like, called compliance by design. Get your
Yes.
compliance right from the beginning, and that will help you scale and build, I think, far more efficiently than if you sometimes, and look, we both know this has been a little bit true in the last 5 years, maybe. A lot of really, good fintechs coming to market, very, very good products, but perhaps have rushed into the market before they really had the compliance and risk structures in place to scale, and then that's caused problems for them, not just with the regulator, but with their investors, because ultimately it is about trust, reputation, and value, I think.
We're not going to mention names, right? but it's a bit about the culture, right? The culture is like move fast, break things, but now they understand that, like, the dynamics of the whole ecosystem is different, right? Your short term decision might impact your roadmap on the long term. And a startup, you're looking at 10 years roadmap. If you want to look at an IPO, some people's done it faster within 7 years, but if you look at an
Yeah,
IPO, yeah,
yeah,
there's a couple of rounds you have to go through. There are a couple of different stakeholders, different journeys in terms of
absolutely.
jurisdictional journeys you have to go. And one journey, one regulator might be speaking to another, all right? And then
Correct.
you might have some challenges. What have you seen in the last 5 years in the fintech and edtech space, Andrew? That's exciting you at the moment, right? There's been so much change, right, within
Yeah,
those two industries, right? What is exciting you at the minute?
I suppose for me, again, I always like to keep things simple, because I'm a simple guy in a lot of ways. But I also like to think about kind of what you might call themes, and I try to center things. So for me, the absolute central theme is data. And
Yes.
as
Yes.
data is more and more digitized, and we're still on a journey, because I still think there's a lot of talk, particularly amongst so-called incumbents, so banks, insurance companies, whatever, digital transformation. I think there's still quite a lot of talk, a lot of theatrics, and how much has really been done. And this is again an area you might find interesting, Hesus, that I do see a lot of similarities between, believe it or not, education and financial services, in the sense that a lot of third level providers are hamstrung by their legacy, their infrastructure, their ICT culture, if I might say so as well. And a lot of, as we know, incumbent financial service providers are also struggling with their legacy, like still using COBOL type thing, And I think that's clearly where fintechs, the digitally native fintechs, have an advantage. And I would call myself a digitally native third level provider, because
Nice.
I don't we don't use any paper, for example. I'm really proud of that. Everything we do is digital, it's online, it's whatever. So going back to the question, as data I think becomes more digitized, and as data therefore unstructured, structured, there's obviously still a lot of issues around the quality of data. But as there's more data out there, guess what? You can use it. You can do clever things. So fast forward to today, clearly everyone's going on about artificial intelligence.
Yes.
But that's just an end product, I think, of more data. More data analytics, more machine learning leads to more AI. I think obviously there was a massive aha moment when we saw ChatGPT
ChatGPT.
in November, what was it,
Yeah.
2022. I build my own GPT these days. It's not that hard to do, but I
Yeah.
can only do it because the amazing accessibility to the data that's there and what that can do, and obviously the applications that are built off it. So in education, it offers lots of interesting challenges and opportunities. But for me, it's embraced the challenge. So we're about to onboard onto a new assessment and platform team. Platform assessment exam. Platform, and AI is very much part of the value that we see in the
Fantastic.
platform, in terms of managing what is a real pain point in education. All the assessments, all the exams, all the marking, all the grading. Trust me, it's a very manual, you know, causes a lot of potential for human error. There's a lot of issues there throughout the third level. So we're very much excited to do that. We think it's going to improve what we do markedly. We encourage learners to use large language models, use ChatGPT. We're starting to give them our own GPTs to help them with their engagement
Fantastic.
with studies. I certainly encourage learners in the sense that you're going to be using this at work. We like the idea, and it's not. Again, this is not us. We're just looking at what's going on and being innovative about how we embrace technology. So-called co-pilots. We're already seeing it in industry. Why shouldn't a learner having a little co-pilot helping them
Yep.
navigate their learnings and applying their skills? So I think the key theme is data and embracing the potential. Not because what I see in education, probably more so. I think a lot of providers, a lot of individuals are they're scared of it. They're scared of change because, look, the truth is, Jesus, a lot of people, and financial services is also similar. They protect their own moats. They protect their own value chains.
Yes.
And I'm a great believer that change has to be incentivized. Where we are
Love that.
fortunate is because we built this ourselves, and because myself and Jerry are highly tuned into, we want to be innovative, we want to be better. So therefore, when we talk about edtech, we're always looking for how can we improve our learners' outcomes. That's the bottom line. How can we improve the outcomes? And that, I think, obviously creates value for the business, which is clearly also part of what we're trying to do.
It's funny you brought it back to the data, right? I will say that as well, Andrew. Right,
Yeah.
it's all about the data, right?
Yep.
This machine learning, AI, they all have to be fed with data, and it's about cleaning the data, then gain context to the data.
And,
As you
and,
mentioned, you probably
and
need different
you
context
know
to
this
create
better than
the
I, Jesus.
GPTs.
So another thing I always like to focus on, and again, hopefully this is of some use to people, is like trends. So I talked about that a little bit earlier in terms of the regulatory trends and where are we going. But I think you also look at other trends. So does anyone seriously think that we're not going to be generating more data of better quality over
There
the
you go.
next few years. Does anyone
There you
seriously
go.
doubt that?
There
So
you
does
go.
anyone seriously doubt we're not going to see more
Mm,
innovation? We can call it AI, but there's other things like quantum computing, whatever. Does
mm.
anyone seriously doubt we're not going to see more innovation and how technology can improve the efficiency and effectiveness and create value? I don't think a serious person could doubt that. I really don't.
It'd be hard to challenge it, right? And to challenge that we're not going to generate more data. The challenge is that the 5G will become more pervasive, like, embedded in worldwide, globally, right? It's challenging. It will be hard to challenge like quantum computing on advanced as well, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. If these are all pointed to one direction, right? You have to follow that direction, or if you put your head in the sand, you might miss the opportunity.
I think
But
another thing you might find interesting, though, Hesus, because it might cross over to your world. Another thing that I've found interesting in the last couple of years, well, I find a lot of things interesting, but I think sometimes the trends are there, but you've got to be careful that you're not too far
too
ahead
early,
where
too early,
people
yeah.
are. And that's where I think education plays a really big role, because you need to you need to educate people into what's possible. So I would often say, for example, people don't know what they don't know,
Mm,
and you've got to create, I think, a culture where people are comfortable with the technology before they really embrace how they can use it. And I see that gap very much in my world, and it's something again we're working on some courses at the moment where very simplistically, you have very talented, experienced risk compliance professionals who are still very nervous anytime somebody starts talking about technology,
mm,
and you have ICT professionals who almost don't know how to communicate with risk compliance. They almost don't know how to talk to each other. So there's a gap. There's a gap
mm.
around digital literacy. There's a gap around data literacy. And I think what it comes to is getting people really comfortable with the technology and the terminology. And look, my world is one big acronym, which is again, it just it just creates barriers. So you need people to be comfortable, aware, see really good use cases, see where the value creation is, and then you can bring them with you. You can bring them with you,
I liked our journey, the education journey, because with all these things, we're always afraid of the unknown, right? And there are two questions here for you here, Andrew. One is we have to clear that playground, right,
Yeah,
for people to
yeah, it's a good
experiment
word. Yeah.
and become comfortable with it. How do you see? Because you guys were different, right? You guys saw the trend and you started executing, and the trend coming back to your value proposition was online, a lot online.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So by being a lot online, you get a lot of clean data, right? Which which could have been a strategy or not strategy, but now you can record everything. You can just get transcript. So you're now set up to capitalize on the opportunity, right? Of
Absolutely. I mean, look. As we all know, luck is also a considerable
a bit
factor
of a
in life.
factor, right?
It is, and look, right time, right place, kind of look is also really important. So we, in a funny way, COVID has had a lot of interesting implications, or
Mm-hmm.
COVID changed the way we thought about certain things, and
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, maybe it didn't change. People are regressing back to the way they did things before. But for us, obviously, for part-time learners, the reality that you could do your classes at home 2 nights a week rather than having to go into the city centre, it was net. It wasn't like a new innovation. It was probably a good example. It just changed behaviour.
Yep.
And once it changed, it was never going back. If you asked any part-time learner today, would you rather do your classes online, or would you rather go into the city centre 2 nights a week, even if you were living near the college?
Mm-hmm.
No way. There's no way, because what online learning enabled us to do, and you do have to work hard at it. It is about engagement. You really do have to structure the classes in a very prepared way. But what it enabled us to do was create a really comfortable, safe learning environment
Mm-hmm.
where people, and I'm a big believer that people learn more when they feel comfortable.
Yes.
And that's part of the classroom environment, but it's also part of the online environment. And I think that was a big pivot point for us, because, as I say, if you can then optimize that experience, um, you can create really good outcomes for your learners. And I always come back to that. But the value is the learner outcome. You know.
And that's a big shift for the industry. I wanted to really
Oh yeah,
double down on that, right? And so, how do you, in your view, right, in your opinion, right, get the industry moving more into digital, embracing different platforms, and also embracing AI? Because a lot of we know
yeah,
a lot of universities try
yeah.
to shut it down, not give
Oh,
their
absolutely.
students
No,
use it at all, right? So, how do
absolutely.
we culturally start moving the needle in the education space? Because it is going to be all the students going to be using it regardless, right? They're going to find
Yeah,
loopholes to use it and clean the data so it doesn't look like it was a AI built, let's say, essay, etc. Right? So just like when Open Book came out, right? People say, "Oh, can you do exams on Open Book?"
yeah,
I just think about
yeah,
it that same way. Just let them use the AI. Some people use it better than others, and the idea is to actually all learn how to use it,
yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
what are your views there? Can you share some of your views there for the listeners, Andrew?
I think overall, I think and but by the way, some of the things you touched on there have presented challenges for us as well.
Mm,
But overall, I
everyone.
think all we can do, and we're lucky enough in that we do. You embrace the change, you embrace innovation, you embrace the technology, and then you try to figure out how to deal with the challenges around that. I think the bigger question you probably were asking me there, Jesus, is you know, education is by and large quite a conservative type
Mm,
of industry, if I can call it that, and that presents an opportunity to providers like
it
us.
does.
So think of it again in the fintech kind of context. We can be agile and innovative. And look, I often joke about this internally. I don't have to have 22 committee meetings to change the delivery or something we're doing in the classroom. So I obviously very much hope that, and I do believe in this, by the way, and this sounds perhaps a little bit, but I do believe I'd like not just us, the providers of that mindset to raise standards, to show
Mm.
that we can embrace everything we've just been talking about and we can provide better outcomes for our students and our learners because I think that's what benefits industry, benefits society, so on and so forth. So it's really about challenging. It's a bit like a fintech thing again. It's about
And
challenging the incumbent,
I don't know.
challenging mindset.
And I don't want to circle all back to this, right? But Ray Dalio built a very, very big hedge fund, right? And it was a big fan of radical transparency, and he believed the radical transparency
Yeah,
raised the bar of his employees, right? I
yeah,
think this is the same thing, right? This ability to access to knowledge and access to technology should raise the bar if
100%.
implemented correctly, right? In education as well,
No,
right?
100%. And I know this is obviously very much part of you know, your current work, but you know, opening up that accessibility as well to parts of the world where they're not maybe say as privileged as
Mm.
we, let's say me, as a white Irishman, very privileged in lots of ways, but at least I try to understand and realise I am privileged. But I think that again for us, the opportunity to internationalize and again showcase how the traditional way that we think about education, and again this has been a challenge for me, Jesus. I've definitely had cases in the last even year where we've tried to do something really different with a class, right?
Mm.
And they've kind of said, why are you doing it this way? And I'm because we're trying to improve the experience and improve the outcomes,
Mm.
but that's not the way we've done it before.
Yeah.
So sometimes
Challenge.
it's hard, sometimes you have to coax people. It's a bit like there's an expression I like to use that I borrowed from somebody. Sometimes people don't know what good looks like because they've never seen it. And I
Mm.
think that applies to financial services as well. There's a better way of doing it. You've just not seen it or you're not aware of it. So maybe that's part of what you and I are trying to do in different ways is showcase and raise awareness that we can actually do this
And
in a more efficient, more effective way.
that's what gets me going, Andre. The economies
Yeah,
of scale and scope this technology can get. Imagine anyone anywhere in the world with a mobile phone can access to education to brilliant mentors and brilliant teachers around the world, right? In a very, very
I mean,
cost effective way, right?
it's potentially a
Transformative.
classic Web3 type idea. I mean, I haven't really seen any strong use cases yet, but I could certainly see the use case out there somewhere.
And Andrea, I couldn't let you go before asking you the two big questions, right? One big question
Go on.
is, what do you see? We can say thematic as well, right? I know you covered a couple of teams already, but the future of edtech and fintech in Europe, you can go globally, but you can even center us Europe Irish opportunity, right? Where do you see it is?
I think it's really just a continuation of the stream of consciousness the last 40 odd minutes that, I think with more digitization and, more, cloud based applications, I think we just see more access, more value creation. I think one of the hardest things to change is culture and
Mm,
people. People are hard to change, actually. The technology is kind of easy in a way, but no, I think Ireland is very well positioned in both those areas to be
mm,
something of a standard setter. Um, and I certainly, in my area, would like to think that we've been very well treated by Enterprise Ireland when we've been in the Middle East, for example,
great.
that we are trying to demonstrate that Ireland is a centre of excellence for things like tech, fintech, financial services generally, so on and so forth. And again, it comes back to that makes me feel like I'm doing something worthwhile. It makes me feel like I'm actually not just about education training. I'm trying to actually, create value for our society and the global society.
I love you mentioned a lot of value.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Andrew, and I really love that. You can see the passion coming across. One of the things I know from a journey perspective, yeah, you wore multiple hats in multiple, let's say, jobs through your lifetime, right? One of the things I want us to finish on, Andrew, is what advice would you give to entrepreneurs or future learners, right? If you can just summarize it in one beautiful line, that would be great.
Yeah,
If it
no,
was
I think that for me, I think network and I think finding smart people to talk to and listen to.
Mm,
And I emphasize the word listen.
mm,
Listen, I've been very lucky, people like yourself. But I think if I was, of a younger age, that's what I'd say. Build your network, find really smart. And by the way, the smartest people also tend to be the nicest people in my world.
mm,
They tend to be very open because they're comfortable with what they are.
mm.
So no, network and listen to smart people.
Where can people find you, Andrew? I know you hang
Oh,
out
okay.
on LinkedIn,
LinkedIn.
so
I am reasonably active on LinkedIn, so Andrew Quinn, I'm easy enough to find. Andrew at pat.edu.eu, but again, the website, PAT Business School. I think anyone who knows me knows I'm not hard to find or hard to have a coffee or a pint or whatever it happens to be. And again, that's part of going back to your previous question, that's part of the learning. And, the more experience you get, the better your judgments get, I think.
no, you've been a great giver to the ecosystem, Andrew. Thanks again for joining the pod,
No, no, take it. No,
and looking
thanks.
forward to catching up again,
Yeah,
on
definitely.
this
All
as
right.
the pod.
Thanks, Hesus. Thank you very much. Thank you.